Hi, my name is Beth Azor, and I own shopping centers in South Florida. And this is my podcast, I Own a Shopping Center, Now What? So today I want to talk about lease forms. I had a call last week. A couple associates have purchased a shopping center, and they were looking for a good lease form. So of course I asked, what about the leases that you're acquiring in the center you're buying? And, they said it was, I think, they weren't the lease forms that they wanted to go forward with. So I think they had some expense stops, maybe some were gross leases. So I get that. This is an important thing to be working on during your due diligence period, because in their instance, they want to, I think they have a vacancy coming up, or they're working on a renewal with a tenant and they want to sign him up sooner than later. So a couple of things here that I want to speak to. First of all, I would not be rushing into doing a renewal with existing tenants. I understand that the clock is ticking with cash flow, but again, spending time in due diligence with regards to if this is a tenant you want to renew, could we find out if there's a better tenant in the marketplace that could backfill them, that would be better for the property, that could pay more rent. So in your due diligence, so don't wait to close before you start thinking about, what do I want this property to be going forward? I remember once we bought a shopping center and we had a dry cleaner. It was a drop. Was it a drop? I'm not sure I think it was a drop, but it might have been a plant, and they were becoming a drop. And I went into my boss's office and I said, I'm so excited. I just took a $20 rent to $24. And he said, yeah, but didn't you take them from $2,000 to $800? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, you just effectively got a less per square foot rent. Go back. And I remember that this tenant, after we closed, was calling me. I want to renew. I want to downsize. I want to relocate. I want to downsize. And we were happy downsizing him and taking him from a plant to a drop. But I didn't realize at 800 square feet, he could pay $30. And I'm walking and I'm not doing the math, but he could pay a lot more, still getting a reduction of monthly rent for his reduction of size, and just be happy that he's, renewing with us. So my partner, I remember saying, don't make me go back to him. I'm your vice president. I'm going to have egg on my face. And my boss/partner said, you have a fiduciary to your partners. You need to go back, do the market study, figure out what an 800 square foot drop dry cleaner space is worth, and then tell him you made a mistake and you were rushing because he was pushing you. So I did that, and I think I ended up getting 28, which is $4 more a square foot. Back then, this is in like 1992, I think. So, but very valid lessons. I was letting the tenant control the time, and you don't need to do that. So take a breath, take a pause, do your research, make sure it's a use you want, and make sure it's the tenant you want, but you're in control. And then regarding the lease form, with these guys, I gave them 2 lawyers' names, but, understandably so, they don't really want to hire a lawyer to draft a lease document. That could be 40 pages. Obviously, the lawyer wouldn't do that. He probably would have it from another client and just amend it appropriately. What I would recommend also you guys could do is, if you're just starting and you don't have a lease form, and you don't like the lease forms that you've inherited, as you are out buying shopping centers and signing confidentiality agreements for offering memorandums, you're going to see lease forms, all kinds of different lease forms. The national tenants will have their own lease forms, so you don't have to worry about nationals. This lease form that we're talking about for your shopping center is mostly for just locals, mom and pops, and regionals. I mean, even the franchisees have their own lease forms these days. So you could get some ideas from some of the leases that you see in some of the offering memorandums that you're looking at when you're buying shopping centers. I mean, our lease is a living, breathing document. As much as I want to keep it as short as possible, I think it's about 20 pages. I've seen leases that are 80 pages, crazy. But we do change our lease often. And at this point, now that I'm doing this for 38 years, I can pretty much draft clauses like I was an attorney, even though for sure I'm not an attorney. But we change leases all of the time. Last year, we changed our assignment clause, I think 3 or 4 times, which I've talked about on this podcast. And then also, if you have peers in the industry, friends, call them, and maybe they'll share their lease document with you, or those are some options. Maybe there's also like CCIM or some mastermind groups. There's a lot of places I think that you can get a lease document if you don't want to hire a lawyer to create one. I'd love to hear some comments about other places that you guys have seen where if you're just starting out and you don't like the leases that you're inheriting, where should you start with a new basic lease form? But I also think that probably you could take the lease form you've inherited and just get rid of the clauses that you know you don't like, for example, the expense stop, and then maybe look at other leases. It's highly likely that there are different leases in the shopping center they're not all the same. So you can borrow from Peter to pay Paul, for example. But it is super important having a strong lease as you acquire shopping centers, and you don't rely on the last guy and what they thought. I mean, I've seen crazy things, certainly gross leases. I've inherited properties with gross leases. I've inherited properties where every lease has a grace clause, which I hate and I get rid of as soon as possible. I've had leases where all the options have fixed rents, which you guys know I hate. So the first thing I do, well, first of all, I now have my own lease form. So anybody new, and if I can in a renewal, I'll get them over to my own lease. But if I can't, what I do, and I'm actually going to try this now this week, actually, with AI, I'm going to take one of my leases that are coming up for renewal at one of my new properties, and I'm going to ask ChatGPT to compare my lease form with this renewing tenant's lease and see all of the areas where there's discrepancy, and obviously I'll check it myself, but see where in my amendment where I need to add things, for example, sales reporting, etc., that are not in my current tenant's lease. So in summary, 2 things, 2 tips for the day here. You need a good lease. And it's an ongoing process. 38 years later, I still change my lease often. So don't think just because you have a good lease today that lease will be up to date a year from now. So it's a living, breathing thing. And as you meet with peers in the industry, other friends who own properties, you can share things. That's how we changed our assignment provisions. I started talking about assignments with my peer group and found out they were much more aggressive than I was, which I was very thrilled to make those changes. So it's a living, breathing document. Hire attorneys, call friends, and start working on it during your due diligence. And I do think you can probably do a lot of it yourself. Maybe you craft your own lease and then send it to an attorney for review. That could maybe be cheaper. Secondly, don't let your tenants push you. It's not on their time, it's on your time. There's nothing wrong with the tenant going month to month, unless you feel like they're at risk of moving out. You know that if I don't renew them, they're going to move across the street. Hopefully you would find that out in your due diligence interview, if that's a possibility. But most of the time, they're not moving out. They don't want to move out. They have too much infrastructure to move out, and it's a weak threat. And so the timing is on you. You also don't have to sign a 5-year lease. If you're unsure of the future of your property, go ahead and sign a 1-year lease with the tenant. You are in control. It's your multi-million-dollar property. They are not in control. So don't let them bully you into doing something you're not prepared to do at that moment. Hope these tips were helpful. We just looked at our stats now that we've finished, I think, 40 of these, and it's very interesting. 80% of you don't subscribe. So subscribe to the podcast, please. That would be great. And share it with others if you like it. But I'm just curious, why, if you listen religiously and you like it, why wouldn't you subscribe? And then you can get alerted when we post. So that was a pretty shocking stat. 80% of our listeners are not subscribers. So subscribe, please. Happy New Year and have a great week.